Hello everyone, my name is Jennifer and welcome to Best Kept Plans. Today's video is going to be a reading recap for December 2022. If you're interested in seeing what books I read in December, please stick around. As I said in my introduction, this is going to be my reading recap for December 2022. I can't believe I'm already doing my last monthly reading recap for 2022. That's kind of wild. As you can see, my Christmas tree is still up. I'm actually filming this on New Year's Day, so we are just outside of 2022. But I wanted to make sure that the year was completely over before I did this recap, as well as filmed my overall 2022 reading recap. For this December reading recap, I am going to be referencing my Archer and Olive Be Hare's collab reading journal. This is where I've been keeping track of all the books that I have read throughout 2022. I absolutely love this journal. I do have a flip through for the first 6 months of 2022 on my channel, and I will, if I can remember, link that. But I have not yet posted a flip through for the second half of 2022. I will be doing that though. I think that's going to come out about halfway through January. So let me flip this open to the right page. That way I can reference it throughout this video. The first book that we're going to talk about, the first book I read in December, was actually my Instagram challenge book for December. So I talk a lot about my Instagram challenge. I basically ask people on Instagram for book recommendations. And each month of the year, I read one book that was recommended to me by someone on Instagram. I was really excited for my December pick. Alex from Artsy Plans is the one that recommended this to me. And her and I feel like have very similar reading tastes. We like a lot of the same books, so I will read anything that she recommends me. And this was also a holiday book, and I definitely wanted to read some holiday books. So the first book I read was In a Holidaze by Christina Lauren. This is a really funny, interesting journey. I enjoyed this. I really did. It has almost a Groundhog Day vibe to it, but with a holiday twist. And I did like the romance in here. I'm a sucker for a childhood friends to lovers romance. That is hands down my favorite romance trope, and that is what we got in this one. So I really, really enjoyed this. I ended up giving it 4 stars, and to me, it was a good introduction to Christmas themed books. The next book that I read was another holiday book. The reason I picked it up is because Plans with M on Instagram did read this and did post about it and said that she enjoyed it. It was a good holiday romance. It was very steamy. And so I decided to pick it up, and that's A Merry Little Meet Cute by Julie Murphy and Sierra Simone. So Plans with M was right. This is a very steamy read. It is one of the steamier books probably that I read this year. There's a lot of open door steamy scenes in here. I did enjoy it. It was definitely a really funny kind of concept in terms of what these two characters' backgrounds are. Now they're filming this holiday movie. Where is this relationship gonna go kind of a vibe? And I ended up giving this, I think, 4 stars. Yes, I gave this 4 stars as well. The next book we're going to talk about is one that I've actually had for a while. So I've had this book for several years and I just hadn't gotten around to reading it, and I really, really wanted to read it this year. So I made sure that it was on my list for December. I made sure that I got to it a little bit earlier in the month so that I didn't not get to it. And that's One Day in December by Josie Silver. I actually really ended up enjoying this book. A little part of me felt like the ending was a bit rushed. Like, I feel like throughout the book, the author really takes their time with the main character and showing different facets of her and her in different relationships and all of that. But then towards the end, I feel like the book got a tiny bit rushed. And I feel like that's why this for me is a 4.5 star read, not a 5-star read. I just wish at the ending, again, I just felt like it was like a little rushed, a little forced, a little pushed, where I think that they could have taken, Josie Silver, the author, could have taken just a little bit more time with it. So, but really, really enjoyed this and do recommend it. The next book that I read was another holiday read. And I will say that I got very, very nervous as I was reading this one, and that is You're a Mean One, Matthew Prince by Timothy Janovsky. I don't know. I could not get into this book. I don't know if I was just hitting a wall in terms of like I was reading too many holiday books in a row. I needed something different. I was reading too many romances in a row. Like I probably did it to myself, but I was having such a hard time getting through this. This did not draw me in right away. It was like pulling teeth trying to get myself to read this. It took me a while to get through, like at least a week, where, you know, this book is, how many pages is it? It's 320 pages. It's not a huge book. I could read this in one day if I really, really wanted to. I could definitely read it in 2 days pretty easily. And this took me well over a week to read. I wanted to like it, right? Because there's a Puerto Rican character in it, and I love seeing Latinx representation in books. They talk about pasteles, they talk about Puerto Rican food. Like, I was so excited to have a character in this book that was Latinx, and I just still couldn't get into it. It did grow on me. I ended up giving this 3 stars. Didn't hate it, didn't love it, was hard to get through. After reading that, though, I was really, really nervous I was going to fall into a reading slump. What I ended up picking up next was completely different. I said, I need to be done with the holiday romances right now. I don't really have any interest in reading another holiday romance right now. Let me try something different. And what I thought I was reading, what I thought I was picking up to read was going to be a fantasy. I had no idea this next book was not a fantasy. And I started reading The Inheritance Games by Jennifer Lynn Barnes. I actually really ended up enjoying this. This is a really intriguing and interesting book. And I just think overall the character was really interesting. I love that it focused on how smart she is, how intelligent she is, how much of a problem solver she is. That was really cool. And this was just a very pleasant surprise. I really, really enjoyed this. I ended up giving it 4.5 stars. And after I read that, I definitely wanted to bop in and read the next book in the series. And I did actually end up picking up the next book in the series. And I think I was about halfway through it when I got a little bit sidetracked. I was actually driving home from work one day and I knew I was going to hit a ton of traffic. And I really wanted to listen to an audiobook on my way home instead of just like listening to music. And so I ended up getting an audiobook off Audible, which was Lovelight Farms. I have heard of B.K. Borison, the author of Lovelight Farms. I have heard good things about their books. And I wasn't necessarily wanting to get into another holiday romance, but when I was looking through things that I could get on Audible, it just kind of made sense. I was like, well, when else am I going to read this, right? I'm only going to read this in December, so might as well just do it. I had an hour commute home. I put it on and I kind of got sucked into it. I really loved Lovelight Farms as soon as I started it. And so even though I was like halfway through the next book in the Inheritance Game series, I kind of kept listening to Lovelight Farms after my commute was done. And I ended up finishing it in like 2 days. So technically the next book I read was Lovelight Farms. I did really, really enjoy it. I thought it was a very, very cute romance. Made me happy about like holiday romances again. I definitely did not want to read any more after that, but it was like very refreshing to read it and really enjoy it since I did have a hard time with You're a Mean One, Matthew Prince. And so I ended up giving Lovelight Farms 4.5 stars. After finishing it, I went back to reading the second book in the Hunger Games. No, not the Hunger Games. The Inheritance Games series, which is the Hawthorne Legacy. I will say this one was a little bit disappointing for me. I liked the Inheritance Games so much that I had a lot of expectation for this book, and I feel like it just kind of didn't live up to that for me. Really, the ending. Like, I was enjoying the book. It was keeping my attention. I was interested. I was intrigued. But I feel like the ending was a little ridiculous and a little convoluted and a little all over the place. And so that kind of lost a little bit of it for me. I did overall still really like the book and it made me want to continue the series. So I did give it 4 stars, but I was really, really hoping for more. And I think just the ending let me down. I did go straight into the final book in the Inheritance Game series after reading the second, which is the final Gambit. And again, being a little bit let down by the second book's ending, I was still very curious with this one, but again, a little bit hesitant. I think I liked this. My issue was like the likelihood of them not knowing that their grandfather had this huge, like, mortal enemy. Like, what is the likelihood of that? Very low, you know? And so that was like a little silly to me that they wouldn't have had any idea about this guy who's now coming out of the woodwork trying to basically destroy their family's legacy and business and all of that. I think, you know, there's one character, which, you know, throughout all three books, whose parentage is like a big part of these books. And I think they further convoluted that parentage in this one. But I guess it all went together in a sense, or it kind of like made sense. Again, I enjoyed it, but I think that just with how good the first book was, I wanted more from the second two. I did end up giving this 4 stars, but yeah, I don't know. The next book that I ended up reading is actually a collection of poems. I had picked this up because the cover is legitimately stunning and gorgeous, and I couldn't not get it. And that is Aphrodite Made Me Do It by Trista. I think I'm saying that name right. Like, look at how beautiful that cover is. It's so, so stunning. This was definitely an interesting collection. She writes poems from the perspective of Aphrodite. She writes poems from the perspective of her. She writes poems about society and their view of women, and also historically the view of women. It's really, really interesting. I did enjoy it a lot, and I ended up giving it 4 stars. And the next book that I read is one that I have that I got an ARC copy of through NetGalley, and I feel like I have to do like some explaining about this one. So I requested this book on NetGalley, and I was approved for the ARC, and I decided I didn't really know what to read after Aphrodite Made Me Do It. So I decided, well, I have this ARC available to me. It's actually coming out, I believe, on December 26th, 2023. So I knew I needed to get to it either this month or at the beginning of January. And I kind of already had my TBR for January all lined up. So I figured I should just read it. I knew it was a romance, and so I just went for it. I went right into it. And the book is Josh and Gemma's Second Time Around by Sarah Reddy. Now, the issue with this is that I did not realize that this is actually the second book in a series. And this series is, or at least I think, because I still haven't read the first one yet, but it seemed to me like a series where it's the same main characters from the first book to the second book. That's the vibe I was getting. So I'm like bummed that I didn't realize it was the second book in a series, because obviously I really would have wanted to read the first book in the series first. I do think that the author tried to introduce the characters and the situation so that even if you didn't read the first book, you can enjoy this book. I do think, though, it is a little bit confusing in the beginning. You kind of get right into like a familial situation where there's a lot of background side characters. And I don't think the author did enough of a good job of explaining who each of those characters was. And so I'm like reading it, and there's like all these names being thrown all over the place. And I was like, I don't know who that is. I don't know who that is. So it was just kind of hard, like going into this book, not having read the first, which is on me. I didn't know that this was a sequel. Getting a little bit further into the book where we're really focusing more on the two main characters, I did appreciate that the main character in the story, and I hope this isn't too much of a spoiler, she is suffering from a TBI, a traumatic brain injury. And as somebody who worked in surgical trauma intensive care for years, I've seen many, many TBIs, and TBIs can manifest incredibly differently from person to person to person. And it's really interesting because working in an ICU in intensive care, when a patient is getting better, you no longer are caring for them anymore. They're going to a step-down unit, they're going to the floor, they're not in the ICU anymore. And so I have only ever seen TBIs fresh and kind of at their worst, in a sense, worst. And so it was really interesting to read how this character was acclimating to life outside of a hospital while trying to recoup from her TBI, while hoping to make progress from her TBI, while going to PT and cognitive therapy and all these things. It did seem kind of quick to me in terms of her progression in the storyline, but again, I don't have any a time frame for that in terms of my own personal experiences as a nurse, because I only ever saw these really fresh TBIs. So it was nice to see a character who had a TBI who was getting better. That was really, really refreshing to see. I did appreciate shows the main character kind of overcoming a really terrible and awful and devastating situation for her, physically, mentally, emotionally. But I think overall, I probably didn't get as much out of this story as I could have if I had read the first book in the series. And so I ended up rating this a 3 out of 5. The next book that I read is one that I have been wanting to read for a very, very long time. And I actually picked it up months ago, and I got about 5 or 10 pages in, and I just really wasn't honestly in the mental place to be able to read this. And I kept saying to myself that I need to come back to this. I need to come back to this. I need to read this before the end of the year. And after finishing Josh and Gemma's, Josh and Gemma, the second time around, I kind of felt like it was a perfect time to dive into this. And so I ended up picking up Station 11 by Emily St. John Mandel. And let me tell you, I love this so much. This was so, so good. I was a little nervous this wasn't going to suck me in right away. I was nervous this was going to be kind of dense and heavy in terms of subject matter, and that was going to take me a long time to kind of get through or to get interested in. But this thing sucked me in right away. I ended up devouring this book in 2 days. I absolutely loved it. I gave it 5 out of 5 stars. Definitely want to read more Emily St. John Mandel after reading this. I thoroughly, thoroughly enjoyed this. Yes, it is post-pandemic life, which with what everyone has been through in the last few years might be a little bit too much to read. But I really, really enjoyed it, and I definitely highly recommend it. And this was 5 out of 5 stars. Really, really love this. Now, because I ended up getting through that in 2 days, I had a chunk of about 3 days before the end of the year. And so I wanted to try to get one more book in, but I needed to be, again, a little cautious about what I was choosing, that it was something that I felt would suck me in and that I'd be able to get through in a couple of days. And so what I ended up picking up is The Off Limits Rule by Sarah Adams. I started reading Sarah Adams earlier this year. I read the cheat sheet from her. That was the first book I read from her. I absolutely loved it. I read When in Rome when that came out. I ended up reading The Match and The Enemy while I was on vacation a couple of months ago. And so I had this book sitting, just waiting for me. And it kind of seemed like the perfect time to pick it up. I wasn't anticipating reading this year. I was really hoping to hold on to it for 2023, just because I've loved all of the Sarah Adams books that I've read, and I wanted to prolong my reading her backlog. But I needed something I could get through in a couple of days, and her books are shorter and they're very quick, easy reads. So I figured this would be perfect. And so I ended up picking this up. This one's really cute. It's brother's best friend type of a vibe. She's a single mom. There's, a kind of a down on her luck type of a situation going on. And I really enjoyed this. This is very sweet. These are closed door or clean romances. I love how sweet they are. They are silly and funny, and they're just very light, and to me very delightful reads. I love all of the Sarah Adams books that I've read, so this was definitely a good one to try to end 2023 off with. And I ended up flying through it and basically read it in almost one day. And I ended up giving it 4 stars. But because I read it in one day, I had an extra 2 days to try to finish something. And so I ended up picking the second book up in the Off Limits Rule duology. So Sarah Adams has a couple of duologies. The Match and the Enemy is one of them. And then the Off Limits Rule is another with the Temporary Roomie. So I ended up picking up the Temporary Roomie. The 2 characters in the Temporary Roomie are in the Off Limits Rule. They're kind of background or side characters. And now this is really focusing on them. And I will say I didn't like this as much as I liked the Off Limits Rule. I felt like one of the characters was almost a little irrationally mean and rude to the main character. I get that there's some like deep-seated emotional things like she's going through, and even before meeting this character, like the look of him and the intrigue of him, I think, to me, that's where that kind of comes from. So I kind of understand she's in such a protective state and a protective mode for herself that she's being overzealously rude and mean to this guy. And I get it, but it was also like a little much. So I didn't like this one as much as the Temporary Roomie, but I did still enjoy it. And I don't know that I just finished it last night, like late last night, right before the clock struck 12, kind of a vibe. And so I don't know that I have a definitive rating for it yet. I feel like I'm going back and forth between a 3.5 and a 4 star. Because even though I rated the Off Limits Rule 4 star, and I don't like this one as much, I feel like I still like it a little bit more than a 3.5. So it's probably like a 3.75 kind of a vibe. But that's it. Those are all the books that I read in December 2022. Again, it ended up being a really good reading month for me. I like that I read a lot of variety in the month of December. I like that I got to read some holiday romance, which was really fun. And yeah, I'm hoping that this good energy and vibes with regards to reading follows me into 2023. I hope you all enjoyed this video. And as always, everyone, please be safe. Bye-bye.